Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, for another of the episodes of Cornish material based on Hunt's popular romances of the west of England, which will eventually be gathered into a gazetteer, suitable for use with Ars Magica 5th edition or similar role-playing games. Long-time listeners may notice that this episode is coming out a week early. Generally, the Cornish episodes are the last episode of each month. For the start of 2018, as an experiment to try and get through the Cornish material, which was written for the Post-A-Day Challenge for November, I'm going to be releasing 2 extra episodes each month. The 2 episodes will be Cornish material, and the Cornish material will be the last 2 weeks of each month. But remember, these are additional episodes, so your standard episodes, short though they may be, will also be coming out probably on the same day. But enough about the structure of the podcast. On to Customs of Ancient Days from Hunt. Hunt provides a series of festivals in this chapter, which he's placed in near calendar order, and that's very convenient for role players because it means that it can serve as a skeleton for a chapter of the gazetteer, and it can also give you seasonal ideas for the Covenant's life. Some of these festivals just need to be flagged so that they can be expanded later into full stories, and some have obvious story seeds, which have either been mentioned in other episodes or which I'll flag now. In many of the earlier chapters, I've tried to boil down Hunt's raw material into story seeds before publishing it. However, this chapter has a lot of colour in it that I'd like to keep for tone in the final gazetteer, and so I hope you'll pardon that there is an enormous amount of quotation. New Year's Day, the sanding of the steps. It's unlucky for a woman to be the first to enter a house on New Year's Day, so it's traditional to pay boys to put sand on the steps and in the hall. Packs of boys rove around offering this service. Is this tradition designed to keep out a single shape-shifting spirit? And if so, who is this spirit? Clearly she's a fairy. Does she personally hate sand? Does she, as a thought, have instead an infernal connection? Some vampires hate sand because they need to count every grain before they can pass it. As another aside, this may tie in with the infernal saint that I'm going to be discussing in episode 100. But let's leave her there for now and move on to what's already a lengthy section from Hunt here. January the 4th, drinking to the apple trees on 12th night. Time to quote Hunt. I won't put on a funny voice. In the eastern part of Cornwall, and in western Devonshire, it was the custom to take a milk pan full of cider, into which roasted apples had been broken, into the orchard. This was placed as near the centre of the orchard as possible, and each person taking a clomben, a cup of drink, goes to different apple trees and addresses them as follows. Health to the good apple tree, well to bear, pocketfuls, hatfuls, peckfuls, bushel bagfuls. Drinking part of the contents of the cup, the remainder, with the fragments of the roasted apples, is thrown at the tree, all the company shouting aloud. Another account tells us, in certain parts of Devonshire, the farmer, attended by his workmen, goes to the orchard this evening, and there, encircling one of the best bearing trees, they drink the following toast 3 times. Here's to thee, old apple tree, hence thou mayst bud, and whence thou mayst blow, and whence thou mayst bearest apples enow. Hats full, caps full, bushel, sacks full, and my pockets full too, huzzah! This done, they return to the house, the doors of which they are sure to find bolted by the females, who, be the weather what it may, are inexorable to all entreaties to open them till someone has guessed what is on the spit, which is generally some nice little thing difficult to be hit on, and is the reward of him who first names it. The doors are then thrown open, and the lucky clodpole receives his titbit as a recompense. Some are so superstitious as to believe that if they neglect this custom, the trees will bear no apples the next year. Christmas Eve was selected in some parts of England as the occasion for wishing health to apple trees. Apples were roasted on a string until they fell into a pan of spiced ale, placed there to receive them. This drink was called lamb's wool, and with it the trees were wassailed, as in Devonshire and Cornwall. Herrick alludes to the custom. Wassail the trees that they may bear you many a plum and many a pear, for more or less fruits they will bring, and you do give them wassailing. In some localities, the apples are blessed on St. James's Day, which is July the 25th. January the 5th, the 12th night cake. Again, a quote from Hunt. The custom, apparently a very ancient one, of putting certain articles into a rich cake is still preserved in many districts. Usually a sixpence, a wedding ring, and a silver thimble are employed. They are mixed up with the dough and baked in the cake, and that night the cake is divided. The person who secures the sixpence will not want for money in the year. The one who has the ring is the first to be married, and the possessor of the thimble will die an old maid. Hunt also quotes a lengthy poem in which each household makes a large cake and all members are given a piece, and whoever gets the penny is the king of the festivity. Plough Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany, geese dancing. And again a quote from Hunt. The first Monday after Twelfth Day is Plough Monday, and it is the ploughman's holiday. At this season in the Isles of Scilly, at St. Ives, Penzance, and other places, the young people exercise a sort of gallantry called geese dancing. The maidens are dressed up for the young men, and the young men for the maidens, and thus disguised they visit their neighbours in companies, where they dance and make little jokes upon what has happened during the year, and every one is humorously told their own without offence being taken. By this sort of sport, according to yearly custom and toleration, there is a spirit of wit and drollery kept up amongst the people. The music and dancing done, they are treated with liquor, and then go to the next house, and carry on the same sport. The term is derived from dance de guiseur, hence guise dancing, or geese dancing by corruption. I've got to put a Bujuana Magus in there. February, Shrove Tuesday. Boys march around in groups carrying cords weighted with stones and beating on doors. In St. Ives they sing, "Give me a pancake now, 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 or I'll souse in your door with a row tow tow." What happens if a boy making his cord uses a stone which has a natural hole in it, that is, an elf stone? Does this create a minor magical item that attracts the fae? The nearest Sunday to April the 28th. The parish feast takes place on the nearest Sunday to the 28th of April. It happened in very early times, when winters extended further into the spring than they do now, that one of the old inhabitants resolved to be jovial, notwithstanding the inclemency of the season, so he invited all his neighbours, and to warm his house he placed on the burning faggots the stump of a tree. It began to blaze, and inspired by the warmth and light, they began to sing and drink, when, lo, with a whiz and a whir, out flew a bird from the hollow of the stump, crying "Cuckoo, cuckoo!" And the bird was caught and kept by the farmer, and he and his friends resolved to renew the feast each year, at this date, to mark their cuckoo feast. Previous to this event, Towendak had no feast on Sunday, which made it singular in Cornwall. This feast is sometimes called the Crowder Feast, because the fiddler formed a procession at the church door, and led the people through the village to the tune on his crowd. Since, as we will see in a later episode, cuckoos are believed to be gelatinous in winter and valuable, could these men have a secret to finding these gelatinous cuckoos? If we assume, for the story's sake, they have a cuckoo wake at every annual feast, how do they know where they're sleeping? May Day. Hunt clearly loved May Day. I'm going to quote him in full for tone. Note the imaginem vis source on the way through. The 1st of May is inaugurated with much uproar. As soon as the clock has tolled midnight, a loud blast of tin trumpets proclaims the advent of May. This is long continued. At daybreak, with their tinterums, they proceed to the country and strip the sycamore trees, called May trees, of all their young branches to make whistles. With these shrill musical instruments they return home. Young women and men devote May Day to junketing and picnics. It was a custom in Penzance and probably other Cornish towns, when the author was a boy, for a number of young people to sit up until 12 o'clock and then to march round the town with violins and fifes to summon their friends to the Maying. When all were gathered, they went into the country, and after were welcomed into farmhouses, at which they called, with some refreshment in the shape of rum and milk or junket or something of that sort, and there they gathered the May, which included the young branches of any tree in blossom or fresh leaf. The branches of the sycamore were especially cut for the purpose of making the May music. This was done by cutting a circle through the bark of the wood a few inches from the end of the branch. The bark was wetted and carefully beaten until loosened and could be slid off from the wood. The wood was cut angularly at the end so as to form a mouthpiece, and a slit was made in both the bark and the wood, so that when the bark was replaced, a whistle was formed. Prepared with sufficient number of May whistles, all the party returned to the town, the band playing, whistles blowing, and the young people singing some appropriate song. The quote ends there. Junket, by the way, is jelly made with milk, and rum is post-period. The 8th of May, the ferry in Helstone. On the 8th of May at Helstone in Cornwall is held what they call the ferry. The word is supposed by Mr. Polwheel to have been derived from the old Cornish word fur, meaning a fair or jubilee. The morning is ushered in by the music of drums and kettles and other accompaniments of a song. So strict is the observance of this day as a general holiday that should any person be found to work, he is seized, set astride a pole, and hurried on men's shoulders to the river, where he is sentenced to leap over a wide place, which he, of course, fails in attempting, and leaps into the water. A small contribution toward the good cheer of the day easily compounds for the leap. After 9 o'clock, the revellers appear before the grammar school and demand a holiday for the schoolboys, after which they collect a contribution from the houses. They then fade into the country, fade being an old English word for go, and in the middle of the day return with flowers and oak branches in their hats and caps, and they dance hand in hand through the streets to the sound of the fiddle, playing a particular tune, running into every house they pass without opposition. In the afternoon, a select party of the ladies and gentlemen make a progress through the street, and very late in the evening repair to the ballroom. A stranger visiting the town on the 8th of May would really think the people mad, so apparently wild and thoughtless is the merriment of the day. There is no doubt of the ferry, originating from the Floralia, anciently observed by the Romans on the 4th of the calends of May. That's the end from Hunt. This sounds like a day off for apprentices, and the grogs get to tax the Magi, or watch as they cheat when they jump over the river. June, Midsummer Night. Time for some more Hunt. If on Midsummer Eve a young woman takes off the shift which she has been wearing, and having washed it, turns it wrong side out and hangs it in silence over the back of a chair near the fire, she will see about midnight her future husband, who deliberately turns the garment. If a young lady will, on Midsummer Eve, walk backwards into the garden and gather a rose, she has the means of knowing who is to be her husband. The rose must be cautiously sewn up in a paper bag and put aside in a dark drawer, and there remain until Christmas Day. On the morning of the Nativity, the bag must be carefully opened in silence, and the rose placed by the lady in her bosom. Thus she must wear it to church, and some young man will ask her for the rose, or take it without asking, and that young man is destined to become eventually the lady's husband. He then quotes from Gay's Pastorals. At eve last midsummer no sleep I sought, but to the field a bag of hemp seed I bought. I scattered round the seed on every side, and 3 times in a trembling accent cried, This hemp seed with my virgin hand I sow. Who shall be my true love the crop shall mow. I straight looked back, and if my eyes speak truth, with his keen scythe behind me came the youth. This practice of sowing hemp seed on Midsummer's Eve is not a particularly Cornish superstition, yet it was at one time a favourite practice with young women to try the experiment. Many a strange story have I been told as a result of the sowing, and many a trick could I tell of which has been played off by young men who became acquainted with the secret intention of some maidens. I believe there is but little difference in the rude rhyme used on the occasion. Hemp seed I mow, hemp seed I hoe. The action of the sowing of the seed and the hoeing must be deliberately gone through. And he who will be my true love come after me and mow. A phantom of the true lover will now appear, and of course the maid or the maidens retire in wild affright. If a young unmarried woman stands on Midsummer Eve in the porch of the parish church, she will see, passing in procession, every one who will die in the parish during the year. This is so serious an affair that it is not, I believe, often tried. I have, however, heard of young women who have made the experiment, but every one of these stories relates that coming last in the procession they have seen shadows of themselves, that from that day forward they have pined, and ere midsummer has again come round, they have been laid to rest in the village graveyard. So that's enough from Hunt for this section. The Magi can intervene in any of these processes, and grogs can, discovering the intention of the maidens, give them a scare. Can Magi prevent a girl who stood on the porch from dying? What power grants the visions, and how does that allow Magi to overcome that power? The end of harvest, the crying of the neck. To be honest, I don't know what I want to do with this, but I have a hunch I can use it for something, so I'm keeping it around instead of cutting it, as I perhaps should. I hope you'll pardon me for including it. Hunt. After the wheat is all cut off in most of the farms of Cornwall and Devon, the harvest people have a custom of crying the neck. I believe this practice is seldom omitted in any large farm in these counties. It's done in this way. An old man or someone else well acquainted with the ceremonies used on the occasion, when the labourers are reaping the last field of wheat, goes round to the shocks and sheaves and picks out a little bundle of all the best ears he can find, and he ties this up very neat and trim, and plates and arranges the straws very tastefully, and this is called the neck of wheat, or wheaten ears. After this field is cut out, and the pitcher once more circulated, the reapers, binders, and women stand in a circle, and the person with the neck stands in the centre, grasping it with both hands. He stoops and holds it near the ground, and all the men forming a ring take off their hats, stooping and holding them with both hands towards the ground. They then all begin at once, in a very prolonged and harmonious tone, to cry, "The neck," at the same time slowly raising themselves upright and elevating their arms and hats above their heads, the person with the neck also raising it on high. This is done 3 times. Then they change the cry to "Wee-yen, wee-yen," which they sound in the same prolonged and slow manner as before, with singular harmony and effect 3 times. This last cry is accompanied by the same movements of the body and arms as when crying the neck. Well, after this, they all burst out into a kind of loud, joyous laugh, flinging up their hats and caps into the air and capering about and perhaps kissing the girls. One of them gets the neck and runs as hard as he can down to the farmhouse where the dairymaid, or one of the young female domestics, stands at the door prepared with a pail of water, and if he who holds the neck can manage to get into the house in any way unseen, or openly by any other way than the door at which the girl stands with the pail of water, he may lawfully kiss her, but if otherwise, he is regularly soused with the contents of the bucket. The object of crying the neck is to give notice to the surrounding country of the end of the harvest, and the meaning of "wee-yen" is "we have ended." It may probably mean "we end," which the uncouth and provincial pronunciation has corrupted into "wee-yen." The neck is generally hung up in a farmhouse, where it often remains for 3 or 4 years. That's the end of the quote from Hunt. The 31st of October. Allen apples at St. Ives. Quote, "The ancient custom of providing children with a large apple on All Hallows Eve is still observed to a great extent at St. Ives. Allen Day, as it is called, is the day of days to hundreds of children who would dream it a great misfortune were they to go on bed on Allen night without the time-honoured Allen apple to hide beneath the pillow. A quantity of large apples are thus disposed of, the sale of which is dignified by the term Allen Market." The 25th of December, Christmas. Hunt notes a tradition in western Devonshire that at midnight on Christmas Day, oxen in their stalls go down on their knees in prayer. Guise dancing, as described above, is common in the 12 days of Christmas in St. Ives and perhaps elsewhere. The guise dances in St. Ives include vast pantomime plays with more participants than viewers. It's also a time for telling hard truths to friends and for breaking courtships. Apprentices get 3 days off over Christmas, not including the Sunday. This is a quote from Hunt about the Christmas plays. St. George and the other tragic performers are dressed in somewhat the style of Morris dancers, in their shirt-sleeves and white trousers, much decorated with ribbons and handkerchiefs, each carrying a drawn sword in his hand, if that can be procured, otherwise a cudgel. They wear high caps of pasteboard, adorned with beards, small pieces of looking-glass, coloured paper, etc. Several long strips of pith generally hang down from the top, and small pieces of different coloured cloth strung on them. The whole has a very smart effect. Father Christmas is personified in a grotesque manner as an ancient man wearing a huge mask and wig, with a huge club, wherewith he keeps the bystanders in order. The Doctor, who is generally the Merry Andrew of the piece, is dressed in any ridiculous way, with a wig, 3-cornered hat, and a painted face. The other comic characters are dressed according to fancy. The female, where there is one, is usually in the dress worn half a century ago. The hobby horse, which is a character sometimes introduced, wears a representation of horse's hide. Beside the regular drama of St. George, many parties of mummers go about in fancy dress of every sort, most commonly the females in male attire and vice versa. Breaking from the quotation of Hunt, I won't give the full script, but there are 2 lines which strike my attention during the fight between the Turkish knight and St. George. One is from the Doctor. "I have a little bottle which goes by the name of Elecampane. If the man is alive, let him rise and fight again. What is that? The other oddity is this, in the stage direction. The latter is knocked down and left for dead. Then another performer enters, and on seeing the dead body says, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If Uncle Tom Pierce won't have him, Aunt Molly must." The hobby horse capers in and takes off the body. So, the hobby horse, which gets sacrificed to the sea after all this is over, carries off the supposed corpse. This seems macabre and needs an explanation in the final Gazette. As an aside, I listened to a podcast called The Folklore Podcast, and its presenter owns one of these Cornish hobby horses. I must look back to see how it relates to this strange custom. Moving on to the second section from Hunt, we discuss sham mayors. Several Cornish towns elect sham mayors. These seem to be similar to Lords of Misrule, which I can't think of when we've used them as fairies in Ars Magica. We must have done. It's so obvious. When I boil this down, it's likely to be a mystery cult or a sort of possessing fairy power. Several times I've tried to work out how we could have fairies take possession of people, much like Loa do in West African religion. I had an idea around Greek and Roman theatre masks that when you put them on, a fairy possessed you, and you could somehow gain its abilities while you were wearing the mask. Little bit superhero-y, but I still like it. Similarly, I think some of that could be used here for sham mayors. But moving on to large blocks of Hunt. Mylor. There was a curious custom in the town of Penryn in Cornwall, which long outlived all modern innovations. On a particular day in September or October, I forget the exact date, about when the hazelnuts are ripe, the festival of Nutting Day is kept. The rabble of the town go into the country to gather nuts, returning in the evening with boughs of hazel in their hands, shouting and making a great noise. In the meantime, the journeyman tailors of the town have proceeded to the adjoining village of Mylor to elect one of their number as the mayor of Mylor, taking care the selection falls on the wittiest. Seated in a chair shaded with green boughs and borne on the shoulders of 4 stalwart men, the worthy mayor proceeds from his good town of Mylor to the ancient borough of Penryn, the van being led by a bodyguard of stout fellows well armed with cudgels, which they don't fail to use should their path be obstructed, torch-bearers and 2 town sergeants clad in official gowns and cocked hats, and each carrying a monstrous cabbage on his shoulder in lieu of a mace. The rear is brought up of the rabble by the nutters. About midday, a band of music meets them and plays them to Penryn, where they are received by the entire population. The procession proceeds to the town hall, in front of which the mayor delivers a speech, declaratory of his intended improvements, etc., for the coming year, being generally an excellent sarcastic burlesque of the speeches of parliamentary candidates. The procession then moves on to each public house door, where the mayor, his council, the officers, are liberally supplied with liquor, and the speech is repeated with variation. They adjourn to their council chamber in a public house and devote the night to drinking. At night, the streets are filled with people bearing torches, throwing fireballs and discharging rockets, and huge bonfires are kindled on the green and on the old wall. The legal mayor once made an effort to put a stop to this saturnalia, but his new-made brother issued prompt orders to his bodyguards, and the posse comitatus had to fly. The popular opinion is that there is a clause in the borough charter compelling the legitimate mayor to surrender his power to the mayor of Mylor on the night in question, and to lend the town sergeant's paraphernalia to the gentlemen of the Shears. St. Germans. One of the first objects that attracts attention on entering the village of St. Germans is the large walnut tree at the foot of what is called Nut Tree Hill. In the early part of the present century, there was an ancient dwelling a few yards southeast of this, which was supposed to have been the residence of some ecclesiastic of former times. Many a gay Mayfair has been witnessed by the old tree. In the morning of the 28th of the month, splendid fat cattle from some of the largest and best farms in the country quietly chewed their cud around the trunk. In the afternoon, the basket swing dangled from its branches, filled with merry laughing boys and girls from every part of the parish. On the following day, the mock mayor, who had been chosen with many formalities, remarkable only for their rude and rough nature, starting from some bush house where he had been supping too freely of the free ale, was mounted on a wain or cart and drawn around it to claim his pretended jurisdiction over the ancient borough until his successor was chosen at the following fair. Leaving the old nut tree, which is a real ornament of the town, we pass by a stream of water running into a large trough, in which many a country lad has been drenched for daring to enter the town on the 20th of May without a leaf or branch of oak in his hat. Halgava Moor. The people of Bodmin had an old custom of assembling in large numbers on Halgava Moor in the month of July, and electing a mayor of misrule for the punishment of petty offenders. Our old historian gives a quaint description. The youthier sort of Bodmin townsmen used sometimes to sport themselves by playing the box with strangers, whom they summoned to Halgva. The name signifies the goat's moor, and such a place it is, lying a little without the town, and very full of quagmires. When these mates meet with any raw servingman or other young master who they may serve and deserve to make pastime, they cause him to be solemnly arrested for his appearance before the mayor of Halgava, where he is charged with wearing one spur or wanting a girdle or some such like felony, and after he hath been arraigned and tried with all requisite circumstances, judgment is given in formal terms, and executed in some ungracious prank or other, more to the scorn than the hurt of the party concerned. Hence is sprung the proverb, when we see one slovenly apparelled, to say, he shall be presented at Halgava Court. The Duke of Restamel. I'll include this here because it seems to date back to an action of Richard of the Romans, who will be covered in some depth in the Gazetteer. However, it does seem to be a tradition which by definition post-dates the Ars Magica period. Nonetheless, here is the quote from Hunt. A very singular custom formerly prevailed at Lostwithiel in Cornwall on Easter Sunday. The freeholders of the town and manor having assembled together either in person or by their deputies, one among them each in his turn, gaily attired and gaily mounted, with a sceptre in his hand, a crown on his head, and a sword borne before him, and respectfully attended by all the rest on horseback, rode through the principal street in solemn state to the church. At the churchyard stile, the curate or other minister approached to meet him in reverential pomp, and conducted him to the church to hear divine service. On leaving the church, he repaired with the same pomp and retinue to a house previously prepared for his reception. Here a feast, suited to the dignity he had assumed, awaited him and his suite, and being placed at the head of the table, he was served, kneeling, with all the rites and ceremonies that a real prince might expect. The ceremony ended with dinner, the prince being voluntarily disrobed, and descending from his momentary exaltation to mix with common mortals. On the origin of this custom, but one opinion can be reasonably entertained, though it may be difficult to trace the precise period of its commencement. It seems to have originated in the actual appearance of the prince who resided at Restamel Castle in former ages, but on the removal of royalty, this mimic grandeur stepped forth as a shadowy representative, and continued for many generations as a memorial to posterity of the princely magnificence with which Lostwithiel had formerly been honoured. To move on to the third section of Customs of Ancient Days, this subsection will cover two traditional sports in Cornwall. We know the fairies play at least one of them, for they use the monolithic stones as their goalposts while hurling. Again, this section is wall-to-wall with quotations. The game of hurling was, until a recent period, played in the parishes to the west of Penzance on the Sunday afternoon. The game was usually between two parishes, sometimes between Burrion and Sancreed, or St. Leven and Senan, or the higher side of the parish against the lower side. The run was from Burrion Cross, in the church town, to the pipers of Boylet. All the gentry from the surrounding parishes would meet at Boylet to see the ball brought in. Hurling matches are peculiar to Cornwall. They are trials of skill between two parties, consisting of a considerable number of men, 40 to 60 a side, and often between two parishes. These exercises have the name from hurling a wooden ball about 3 inches in diameter, covered with plate of silver, which is sometimes gilt and has commonly a motto, Gwer wiag, yeo gwer tiag, fair play is good play. The success depends on catching the ball dexterously when thrown up or dealt, and carrying it off expeditiously in spite of all opposition from the adverse party, or if that be impossible, throwing it into the hands of a partner, who in his turn exerts his efforts to convey it to his own goal, which is often 3 or 4 miles distant. The sport therefore requires a nimble hand, a quick eye, a swift foot, and skill in wrestling, as well as strength, good wind, and lungs. Formerly it was practised annually by those who attended corporate bodies in surveying the bounds of parishes, but from the many accidents that usually attended the game, it is now scarcely ever practised. Silver prizes used to be awarded to the victor of the games. A correspondent at St. Ives writes, "Hurling the silver ball. This old custom is still observed at St. Ives. The custom is kept up at St. Columb and St. Blazey on the anniversary of the dedication of the church. St. Ives' feast is governed by Candlemas Day, it being the nearest Sunday next before the day. On the Monday after, the inhabitants assemble on the beach, where the ball, which is left in the custody of the mayor for the time being, is thrown from the churchyard to the crowd. The sides are formed in this way: Toms, Wills, and Jans take off alls on the sands, that is, all those of the name Thomas, John, or William arranged on one side, those of any other Christian name on the other. Of late years, the odd names have outnumbered the Toms, Wills, and Jans. There is a pole erected on the beach, and each side strives to get oftenest to the goal, that is, the pole, the other side manfully striving to keep them out and to send their opponents as great a distance from the pole as possible. The tradition is that the contest used to be between the parishes of Lugdven, Lelant, and St. Ives then being part of the living of Lugdven, and that they used to have friendly hurling at Lugdven, and afterwards the contest between Lelant and St. Ives. A stone near Captain Perry's house is shown where the two parishes used to meet at the feast, and the struggle was to throw the ball into the parish church, the successful party keeping the ball, and the unsuccessful buying a new one. St. Ives is said to have outnumbered the Lelant folks, so they gave up the contest, and the ball was left with St. Ives. This much is certain, that the feasts of St. Ives, Lelant, and Lugdven fall properly on a single Sunday, though misunderstanding has arisen, Lelant claiming to be governed by the day before Candlemas Day, which will alter the three every 7 years. The game of hurling is but now rarely played, and the Sabbath is never broken by that or any other game. The faction fight at the Curry Great Tree. On a green knoll, in the centre of the intersection of the roads from Helston to the Lizard, and from Magwin to Curry, flourished an ash tree of magnificent dimensions. The peculiarity of its position, together with its unusual size, in the midst of a district singularly destitute of trees, rendered it famous throughout the surrounding neighbourhood, and in designating a special locality, reference was and still continues to be made to the Curry Great Tree as a position generally known. During the last 50 years the tree has been decaying, and at present only a portion of the hollow trunk remains, which is rapidly disappearing. It stands halfway up a gentle rise facing to the north, and passing over the road, the country people speak of a dim tradition of a time when the road ran with blood. The occasion of this, which is almost forgotten, was a faction fight on a large scale between the men of the parishes of Wedren and Breage, happening about 100 years since. A wreck took place near the Lizard, and Wedrenmen, being nearest, were soonest on the spot to appropriate whatever flotsam and jetsam might come their way. Returning laden with their spoils, they were encountered at the Great Tree by men bound on a similar errand, and a fight, as a matter of course, ensued, which was prolonged till the following day. The contest is said to have been a terrible one, each party being armed with staves. The savage nature of the fight may be inferred from the following fact. A Wedrenman named Gluyas, having been disabled, was put upon the top of the roadside hedge out of the Malay, where he was seen by a Breag woman known as Prudy the Wicked, and by her quickly dragged into the road, Prudy exclaiming, "If thee aren't dead, I will make thee," suiting the action to the word by striking Gluyas with her patten iron until he was dead. There is some account of Prudy having been taken to justice, but she does not seem to have been punished. These fights between parishes were so common in those days that any death occurring in the fray was quietly passed over as a thing of course, and soon forgotten. So late as 30 years ago, it was unsafe to venture alone through the streets of the lower part of Helston after nightfall on a market day, owing to the frays of Breage, Wedren, and Sithne men. So writes a friend residing in Helston. And that's Hunt for this episode. I must admit, I am surprised by this episode's length. Just as a reminder of what I said what must seem a good half hour ago, this Cornish episode is a bonus episode. Looking through my notes, it's about 4 times longer than the episode it's a bonus to, but that's by the by. See you next week, or if this is the first episode for today you've downloaded and there's another one queued, see you in a few minutes.